Hey everyone, welcome to Sidetrack Adventures. This is Steve. Today we're going to be taking a look at some Nevada history. And in fact, one can argue this is where Nevada began. Because today we're going to be exploring the town of Genoa, which was founded in 1851. And though they didn't know it at the time, this would become the first town in Nevada. We are currently in Nevada's Carson Valley, on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, not too far from the California state line and Lake Tahoe. Our proximity to California is the reason this town came to be. A trading post was established near here in 1849 to sell goods to people traveling to California on the Humboldt Trail, right before they began their journey into the Sierra. At that time, the area that would eventually become Nevada was still part of the Utah Territory and largely unexplored. We'll start our tour of Genoa today at Mormon Station, because we might as well start at the beginning. The original trading post that opened near here in 1849 was just a small log enclosure without a floor or a roof. That first trading post was abandoned within a year. In 1851, about 20 Mormon businessmen from Salt Lake City, led by Colonel John Reese, established a permanent station here. This is actually a recreation of the original settlement that was built in the 1940s. The original one burned down in a fire in 1910. They built this stockade that also doubled as a lodging house, fortress, and of course, a trading post. Being the only trading post or civilization for hundreds of miles, and the last chance at supplies before you cross into the Sierra Mountains, it was definitely a seller's market here. They even had a deal where you could trade 2 of your tired oxen for one of their fresh ones. They'd then rest the 2 up that they got and trade them again to the next group of wagons that would come through. The wagons would pull right into this fenced-off area, and this had to seem like heaven to them after crossing the Nevada desert. The area between here and Salt Lake City is sparsely populated now, but in 1851, aside from the occasional trade with Native Americans, there was nothing for those travelers. The camp seems pretty basic, but this was the highlight of the day when on a wagon train. This was really the only chance you had to socialize or even just get off your feet for a bit. This freight wagon was kind of like the semi-truck of its day. This is what would carry all the heavy supplies. This recreated fence is actually shorter than it would have been historically. The original one would have been about 13 feet tall. We'll check out the museum here real quick. Here's what the building that we're in once looked like. The current recreation doesn't have that false front on it though. This log is all that remains of the original station that burned down in 1910. This would later serve as a station for the Pony Express and the Overland Stage. The area saw a lot of traffic in the early 1850s, and the town quickly grew, adding a post office, sawmill, and a blacksmith. The first non-Native American child to be born in what is now Nevada was also born here. Here's a little bit on Snowshoe Thompson, one of the town's most famous residents, but we'll talk more about him later. Another famous resident was Hank Monk, who was probably the most famous stagecoach driver of the American West, and for a time he drove stagecoaches between here and Placerville, California, which was a hair-raising route through the mountains. Mark Twain even talked about him in his book Roughing It. and here are his bearskin gloves. Nevada's first newspaper, the Territorial Enterprise, was published here for a couple of years before moving to Virginia City. In the 1860s, Mark Twain would write for this newspaper. The whole settlement was known as Mormon Station for the first few years, but in 1856 the name was changed. One of the LDS church leaders, Orson Hyde, changed the name, supposedly in honor of Christopher Columbus, to Genoa. It looks like a little bit of the original apple orchard is still here, so if you come here at the right time, you might be able to get some free apples. This building here was a blacksmith shop from 1908 to 1918. It's kind of amazing to think that blacksmith shops were still around in the early 1900s, at the time of automobiles. But from what I understand, the main business of this blacksmith shop was to repair farm equipment. This is Genoa's main street, and the Overland Immigrant Wagon Trail went right down this street. Across the street is the old courthouse that was built in 1865, and we'll head over there next. That's also where the story of a curse that was placed on the town kind of begins as well. The courthouse is now a museum, but it looks like there's a number of interesting monuments on the outside to check out before we head inside. This boundary marker was put up on the California-Nevada state line in 1863, and then when a new survey was done in 1872, the marker was moved to the new state line, and that date on the marker was changed to 1873. Here's a monument for the Pony Express. We're in the courthouse now. Genoa served as the county seat for Douglas County, Utah Territory, then Nevada, until 1916, when the county seat was moved to Minden. The courthouse then became a school. The town was also briefly the provisional capital of the Nevada Territory, when Nevada was separated from Utah, before the capital was moved to Carson City. When this was a courthouse, the court was on the second floor, while the jail was down here on the bottom floor. And this is where that curse that I was talking about earlier kind of begins. So in 1897, a man named Adam Uber killed somebody in a bar fight and was brought here to the jail, conceivably placed into one of these cells here. And this drawing in the back of this cell is actually pretty creepy. So Adam Uber was in jail here for a week when a mob of angry townsfolk broke in, held the sheriff and constable at gunpoint, and broke Adam out. And we'll get back to his story a little bit later and why there's a curse when we get to the hanging tree. We're upstairs now, and here's the courthouse. This place was a one-stop shop. The jail downstairs, the court upstairs. If you were arrested and put in jail, you weren't seeing the outside for a long time. George Washington Gale Ferris, the inventor of the Ferris wheel, also lived in Genoa for a short period of time. The biggest event every year in Genoa is the Candy Dance. It was first organized in 1919 by Lillian Virgin Finnegan to raise money to install streetlights in town. She had the idea to have a dance and to make candy to pass out to ensure a good turnout. They've continued to hold the candy dance every year since, and the funds raised each year cover a good percentage of the town's annual budget. Here's a room dedicated to John Thompson, otherwise known as Snowshoe Thompson, probably Genoa's most famous citizen. Between 1856 and 1876, he delivered mail between Placerville, California and Genoa, no matter what the weather, including through some massive blizzards. His ability to make it through the mountains despite the conditions became legendary, and there was even an episode of the TV show Death Valley Days about him, and Johnny Horton released a song in 1956 called Snowshoe Thompson. A lot of the historic buildings in town were destroyed by a large fire that happened in 1910 and started right here, where ironically the volunteer fire department is now located. Someone staying at an almshouse, or better known as a poorhouse, was trying to rid his bed of bedbugs, so he decided to burn a pan of sulfur under it. That ended up setting his straw mattress on fire and burned down several blocks of the town, including the original Mormon Station and the wood in the courthouse, leaving only its brick shell. Here's another Pony Express monument. I think this is the third Pony Express monument I've seen so far in the town. And here's a statue for Lillian Virgin Finnegan, who had the idea for the candy dance. And across the street, there is a statue for Snowshoe Thompson. This church was built in 1910 after the original burned down in the fire, and this one is on the National Register of Historic Places. There was originally a store in this location, but in 1874, the Masons built their hall where the store once stood. Before this hall was built, the Masons held their meetings in the courthouse. And you can see some of the recreated paintings on the building. Here's an old Lincoln Highway marker. The Sierra Nevada southern route of the Lincoln Highway went through Genoa. This stone building, which is now an antique store, was built sometime around 1866. There was a hotel here in the 1860s called the Pennsylvania House, where this wooden structure is now. I'm not sure when this wooden structure dates to. It does look like it has one guest who has yet to check out. This bar is said to be the oldest in Nevada, opening in 1853, and this is by far the biggest attraction in town. This was called Livingston's Exchange until 1882, when it was purchased by Frank Feddick. It then became known as Feddick's Exchange. It's said that John Wayne rented out the entire bar when The Shootist was being filmed nearby, so that he could drink alone. Mark Twain, Teddy Roosevelt, Ulysses S. Grant, and Clint Eastwood supposedly drank here as well, among other notable guests. The electric lamps in here are said to be original to the bar. They were oil lamps, but converted to electricity at the turn of the 20th century. The diamond dust mirror on the back of the bar came from Glasgow, Scotland in the late 1840s. It was shipped around the Horn to San Francisco, then brought here by covered wagon. There used to be bras hanging on the ceiling, but when Raquel Welch visited, she was asked to leave her bra here, and she agreed on the condition that all the others be taken down. So hers is the only one still hanging. All of the others are kept in a safe, and apparently if you look in the safe, it requires a donation, and based on the look on my wife's face when I brought it up, we aren't looking in the safe today. This is such a cool town. You really do get a small glimpse back in time being here. This is the Pink House, built in 1855. You never know who you'll run into just walking around town. We are about a half mile out of town now, and I promised I'd get back to Adam Uber and the curse. And this is the hanging tree. So the angry mob that broke Uber out of jail marched him here, stripped him down, tortured him, put a noose around his neck, and told him he had a minute to pray. They didn't give him the full minute before they started hanging him. After Uber died, they shot the body repeatedly for good measure. The story goes that he managed to get out some last words while hanging, and those words were to put a curse on everyone involved that would last 7 generations. So of course, every bad thing since could be attributed to the curse. The hanging shocked the state, and the governor issued a reward for any information on who was responsible, and a grand jury was convened. But no one talked, and no one was ever punished. It was called the blackest moment in the history of Nevada. The hanging tree is absorbing this barbed wire fence, which I think really gives it a more menacing look. But this seems like a good time to head to our final stop in Genoa, the cemetery. I believe Snowshoe Thompson is the most famous person to be buried in this cemetery, but we'll take a little bit of a look around. It looks like there are quite a few graves dating back to the late 1800s. This grave is surprisingly blank. It was probably meant for more names, but they must be buried elsewhere. And here's the grave of Snowshoe Thompson, and right next to him is his son Arthur, who sadly died only 2 years after Snowshoe Thompson died. And you can see the skis on his grave. He was called Snowshoe Thompson, but he didn't actually use snowshoes, he used skis. I'm not sure how he got the name Snowshoe. I guess Ski Thompson just didn't sound good. So that's our look at Genoa, the oldest town in Nevada. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.